Everybody kind of asleep already? Waiting for lunch? I won't take too long, don't worry. So let's see where we can take this. Let's talk a bit about security and how great security is normally. Normally it looks something like this, right? And this is us kind of in the middle, and we say, this is fine, there's no problem. I want to pick out two things about security. From the OWASP list, I want to take the very first item they have on the list and the very last one. So the very first one is still the good old classic SQL injection. Doesn't have to be SQL, would also work for NoSQL systems. But the idea is you have some system and you can inject something into the system that you don't intend to have there. Still the number one. Should be done by now, but it's still coming back again and again. The other thing is the very last one. I want to combine those two with insufficient logging and monitoring, where you basically don't see stuff that is happening to your system, and you cannot react accordingly because you just don't know what is happening in your system. And the idea is then to kind of avoid the bottom half, where you figure out that everything is on fire and nothing works anymore and you don't want to get there. This is what we want to avoid. So this is the general idea of where we want to take this. So I work for Elastic, the company behind Elasticsearch, Logsearch, Kibana, Beats. You might be using us for logging already. I have a couple of stickers over there if any are left on one of these seats. But that's pretty much about it. Let's dive into the content. So I built very highly monitored Hello World applications, and today will be the Hello World of SQL injections and how to interact with that. So let's head over to that one. You can, by the way, interact with that as well. It's live and online. You can do the SQL injections as well. If, I don't know, maybe on a phone it's kind of hard to type all the right characters, but if you have a laptop handy, you can get your name into the demo as well, if you feel like it. So I'm using this name and then WTF, because WTF is the right domain for any demo. Did anybody figure out why I'm using this as my Twitter handle and my domain here? Let's see. It has something to do with my name. With my last name. Anybody sees it? Just to get you thinking. Does anybody remember ROT 13? When you rotate the letters by 13? And the nice thing about ROT 13 is if you rotate again by 13, you will be back at the original. So if you take my last name and rotate by 13, this is what you get. By the way, what does, with one N, what's the German word for that? The German word, because I'm from Austria, and for us, Krenn with one N means something. What is it? Horseradish. Anyway, yeah, the Austrian German is slightly different, unfortunately. So let's head over to our demo. Let's see what we have here. So we have, I put 3 Elastic employees in here, and you can actually check out the Elastic employees. For example, you can look at my record, and you just have the details here. Kind of the interesting idea is how am I fetching those? I'm just adding the ID here I want to fetch, so I could just say ID 2, and then I would jump to the next one, and then the ID 1. And maybe I have not written that code so well, so maybe we could inject something through that variable. How would you check a system if that might be vulnerable for any injections? Anybody using any tools for that to automatically test your variables? So one of the common ones is SQL map. SQL map is, well, as the name says, if you have something like this where somebody, I guess everybody knows little Bobby tables. If you name your children accordingly, or if you assume you have a different ID and we try with that ID, bad stuff will happen. And to actually automate that, there is SQL map. And it's basically a Python tool which will automatically try to test your inputs if you can inject anything, and if your system starts behaving differently than it should be behaving. So what that looks like is, I have SQL map here, but that's so small that nobody can read it. Let's make that slightly larger. So here you have SQL map, Basically, I tell SQL map, I want to run SQL map against this URL with this specific ID, and it will then just try to throw various things into that ID to actually break in or see if the system behaves in an unexpected way. So you can just run that. It will ping it, it will figure out, stuff is happening. It will then ask me some questions as well. For example, it figured out that this is maybe MySQL, which in my case is correct. And I want to skip the tests for other databases, and that is true. I don't want to skip or do anything other, and I want to run the risky checks as well. And now this will run various queries. You can see this is trying out various queries and combinations of things against that input to see if there is anything fishy about it. Like, can you run like any semicolon and then add on anything after that? Or can you inject any weight queries or any other parameters into that? And afterwards, it will show us a report and it will tell us like, hey, I found something that looks like I can inject something, or no, everything looks good. I don't want to test for other parameters. The ones I just want to check for this ID parameter, I don't have any more anyway. And then you get this ID and it will tell you like what is kind of possible on this input field. So it found out you could use ID1 and then you could use something that is true and combine that. You could add, for example, something to make it sleep, because then it will just take 5 seconds until the response comes back. Or you could use a union to combine this data with other data in the data store. And it basically tested those and gives us some hints of what we can do with the system or what we can try. And once you have tried with SQL map to see like, oh, this could be vulnerable, then you might do a manual check to see if you can really add anything. Before we do that, let's take a very quick look at the code. So this is intentionally bad. You shouldn't write stupid code as me, like this, but here is kind of like the classical case of SQL injection. So we have a select all from employees, where ID, and then I just pass in the variable that I have here. And then I just run the SQL query. I will actually log it. So afterwards, we'll look at the actual queries that I have been running, or if you have added any queries. And then we just see what happens. So how would I start my SQL injection here? Yeah, I have set it up that way, like by default in the newer configurations with PHP, which I'm using in the backend, and MySQL, you could only run a single command. I've set it up explicitly the way that you can run a second command. So we could just retrieve that ID, and at the same time, what we can add, I'll show you the text on the slide, because otherwise it will be very hard to read. Basically, I'm adding a semicolon, and then I just add a fourth employee. So for example, somebody wants to join the Elastic employees, they just add their details there. If you want to, you can just do the same thing here and add yourself to the employees as well. So let's see if I run, where is it? This one is the one. So basically, I add a semicolon, I add my insert, and I run my queries. If I run that query, what will happen to the page? Will I get an error? Well, let's try it out. No, nothing happened. Or did nothing happen? Let's go back. And let's actually see, now we've added a fourth person to our system. So this worked like textbook SQL injection. We just added the fourth record for test, and a salary of 10,000. So you have been able to just add another ID or another employee through the SQL injection. Has anybody else tried any queries? So what I'm also doing here, by the way, is, and this is where we start to get into the logging, is while I wrote bad code to write the query, I have also logged the SQL query. So here I just have an error log statement, and I'm writing that out to var log app log. So I will at least be able to see what queries have people been running against my system to figure out what has been happening or what good or bad stuff people have been doing. And I am collecting that. So basically, I'm just tailing that log file with file beat, because, well, one of our products is very easy. It's just like tail F over the network. We tail that file and then can show you what this is doing. So if I'll make this larger, no worries. Less var log app log. This is the one I want. You can see here you have, this is a good SQL statement. This was one of the SQL statements that we have been running, but there are other not so great SQL statements. And basically what I want to do is I want to collect that log file and I want to centralize it because, well, maybe that server will die or I have lots of services and I don't want to log into every service to get to the log files. So I will just centralize that to figure out what all my systems are doing here. So to do that, I have file beat, which basically is, where's my rule? This rule here. Basically what I'm doing is I'm saying I want to collect everything under var log app log. I will tag it with application app to store that, and I will just tail the file and centralize that. Easy enough. Then you could head over to your centralized dashboard to see how that looks like to find those log messages. But before we jump into that, maybe let me take a step back and let's talk about logging again. So we want to log all the things because oftentimes you don't want to be that little boat here that looks at the large log file, because you don't really want to grab a 7 GB log file or log into 10 services via SSH to collect those. So you kind of want to centralize stuff to avoid that pain. And maybe you're already using that. Is anybody using the Elk stack already or Elastic Stack? Okay, a few. This is kind of like the classical way to put it. You have Elasticsearch to store the data, Kibana to visualize it, Logstash to get the data, parse it, and enrich it. What do I mean when I say enrich? What could be enrichment? For example, I have an IP address and I want to get the geo-IP. So I want to be able to draw it out on a map and say like, oh, this request is coming from this specific city or region. This is working fine. However, Logstash is written or was written in Ruby and is now JRuby, so you always need the JVM to run it. And especially if you're not a Java shop, people are not too keen on putting the JVM on all their servers. Probably a lot of people not from the non-Java world agree. So that's why we added another thing. And well, yeah, this is widely used. If you're using any of these services, the logging or security logs or whatever are running through the stack. But maybe you don't want to put Java on all your servers. For that, we have put or added another component called beats. The problem is there is no B in Elk. And well, we tried with that Elk B or Belk, and it could look something like this. You see, it's a B, it's an Elk. It's kind of a nice marketing idea, but our platform is always about scaling. And this is not very scalable, because what happens if we add another component and get another letter? We will need to make up another animal, and whatever that letter will be, it will be kind of hard to make up that next animal. So we try to normally just call it the Elastic Stack, because we just throw whatever letters we have into that. But we still understand Elk. It's kind of the same thing, it's just like the beats are just easier to collect stuff. So we tail that file and throw it into our stack. So what you get is, in our example, we're just using beats to collect the file, store it directly in Elasticsearch, and then visualize it in Kibana. And that's what I just wanted to do. So here, I only have a single server, but you can see in the last 12 hours, we could also change the time range, but let's stick to 12 hours for now, I have collected 15,000 something log events from all kinds of different things. So I'm collecting the MySQL error logs, I'm collecting the Nginx error logs, I'm also getting logs from my system and my application and everything. So let's drill down into just what our application is doing here. And we added, here in the configuration, I said, we add this application app. And this is something on which we can easily filter on. So down from our 15,000 hits, I can just say application is, then it suggests something. Let's go with app. If I filter down on that, instead of 15,000 events, we just have 100 or 200. And you can see I have been running some tests here, and we collected our logs. And if you unfold that event here, you could see all kinds of information. For example, you could see where is this running on which host. If you have lots of hosts or lots of different operating systems, you could see, oh, somebody is trying to attack my Ubuntu server. You could see the raw message. So this was the query that has been running. Since this is running on AWS, you could also see which instance ID in which region and everything. We automatically enrich that data, so you could filter down on that and drill into that. But right now, I'm only interested in that message. So what I'm doing here is I will toggle that column to kind of like just show that column. And if I fold that in now, you can see this is when it happened. And these are the actual queries you have been running. And somebody seems to have started trying to drop table employees. Have you been successful? It's a shame. Because I kind of expected that, and you only have insert permissions. You can read and insert, but you cannot delete or update any data. Just to avoid exactly this. But it's very nice. Thanks for trying that out. So you can see this is what people tried. We should still have our data. If I go back and refresh that, our data is still there. You cannot delete it with the user I'm using here. But at least you can see what people have been trying. So you can see this here, this was a regular query. And this one here is not such a regular query or not something you really want to have. This was when I inserted my other employee, but you could also see this was SQL map, for example, running more complex queries because these were just ran in an automated fashion. But you could see all the things that SQL map has been trying out here because, well, we collect all the logs here. So it's nice that we know what is happening, but maybe we want to protect our system from it actually happening. So let's switch to ModSecurity. ModSecurity is basically a little application that you can either run as a proxy or as part of your web server. Ideally Apache, because Nginx is still a major pain in the ass to install ModSecurity. You still need to compile Nginx and ModSecurity. With Apache, you can just add a module. And what that basically does is it has a lot of rules defined of what input parameters look not so nice. And it will filter out those not so nice input parameters. And will just discard them and throw you back a forbidden. So I have running, everything we've done so far is Nginx. And you can still run your attacks against that. But I'm also running Apache with ModSecurity enabled, just with the default security rules. And I'm running that on port 8080. So it's using exactly the same PHP application. It's just different application server or different server and different port. So if you head over to 8080, you can have the exact same data. If I, for example, go back and try to insert, no, this is the wrong one. If I insert another, oops, if I insert a fifth employee, let's add a fifth employee, and I switch browser, you will get your fifth employee. And as we have seen before, if I, for example, I could also try something like, this is the one I want, delete from employees where ID 1. Nothing will happen because I don't have the permissions to run that. And you can see here, all my data is still there. But this is just because the delete or drop is not allowed for that user. But I can still insert more users. The thing is, ModSecurity will block that because ModSecurity has the right rules and it will know like, oh, you have a parameter that starts with a semicolon, that's kind of unusual. And then you also have an insert, delete, drop or whatever in that. That's also very unusual. Maybe I should block that. And that's exactly what is happening in the background. So what I'm doing here is, if I run my insert into, what will happen? Any guesses? No, it's, oops, no, this is not what I wanted. Why are you doing this? Oh yeah, that's true. Thank you very much. This is what I want. If you run that, it will actually tell you forbidden, because ModSecurity, so the default mode that ModSecurity has is it will log everything but not interfere, but I have kind of turned it on, and it will now actively block any bad requests. It's up to you. Maybe sometimes you get good stuff blocked. For example, I've seen there was an interesting bug where in San Francisco there is Union Square. And then when people entered something with Union Square, it saw union and is assumed it's the MySQL or the SQL term union, and it was always blocking the Union Square. But they worked around that and excluded that. Sometimes your permissions or like your rules are a bit too strict, and then you just filter out good traffic, but better safe than sorry probably. So what you get here is forbidden. And this will actually also end up in the Apache log. And we will be able to find that. However, the Apache log is something that is very common. And what we also have in the file bit is we can just say, like, I want to collect the Apache log, because we know on this operating system, which is Ubuntu, I know where the Apache log is. It's var log Apache and then error log. And it will, the beat will automatically collect that file, forward it, parse it, and just store it in the right way. So let's have a look if we can find that one here. So if I head over, we're still looking for the log files, but we need a different filter now. And the filter I want, file set module. I only want the things that come from Apache. You can see I'm collecting various pieces of information here. I'm getting the logs from Nginx, the system logs, MySQL, Apache, and AuditD for security. But here I'm only interested in the Apache logs. Let's see what we have in the Apache logs. And here you can see things that were blocked because you got a 400 back. These were all things that our rules assumed were something not so nice that people tried out. Let's look at the raw message of one here. Somewhere in there, if we're lucky, we should find the right message that we have provided, or actually we should be able just to search for insert. This is the actual output of what ModSecurity will then log for you as well. So you can see these were the rules that applied. So this is insert into employee. This was the actual rule that, or the ID that you tried to insert. It was critical because, well, ModSecurity figured out this is not the right thing to do. And here you can also see this is the rule that actually hit you. And you could just look that up in, let's look at the actual rule. And here you can see, okay, you can set the paranoia level of how strong you want to make this. And then you have the actual rule, how to see, like, what does an SQL injection look like. And luckily, somebody has created a lot of rules that you can just use by default, because I haven't changed the rules here. It's just the default rules that are provided by ModSecurity. But probably somewhere in there, you would find there is an insert. So anything that looks like this regular expression, which does one of these requests, looks kind of fishy and would then be blocked automatically. If you would want to write your own rule, that would be one example that is kind of very simple. So you can see, let's assume we have a form, and then you have a specific ID for that event that you want to do, and we want to actually deny the message, we want to log it, and the message for the log is spam detected. And what we're checking for is if you're posting something, or if you're doing an HTTP post, we will check the body of your request if it contains pills, insurance, or Rolex. And if it's one of those, there's a very good chance that you were not writing a nice comment on my website, but some spam message. And this way, ModSecurity could just filter those out. And you could then just tune that to whatever your current problem is to filter out whatever is bugging you in your system. Any questions so far? Everybody good? Is anybody using ModSecurity actually? just logging or blocking? Blocking, okay. Do you have a lot of false positives? And then you tuned your rules. Okay. Yeah, that's what might be necessary. By the way, you could also get similar information like this in other places. For example, while we could look at the logs, we could get the same information somewhere else. For example, I have running something that is called pretty close to Wireshark. Who's using Wireshark? Those are the desperate days, right? When you have no clue what is going on anymore, and then you just start looking at random packets. At least that's always my approach. Like when I have no clue anymore where I'm headed, I will start Wireshark. Wireshark is nice, but Wireshark in a distributed environment is not so much fun. Instead, what you could do is, we have something called packet beat, since we have all kinds of different beats. What the packet beats are doing, the packet beats are like Wireshark. They're using the same library, libpcap, and they can just analyze the network traffic as it comes in. So let's look at, if I could type. Let's head over to the overview. Basically, what packet beat does is, and I'll show you the configuration very quickly, and we will be able to get the same information. Packet beat just runs here, and it understands various protocols. So it would know, for example, which MySQL queries have you been running, but it would, for example, also look into HTTP traffic and analyze that. And it will know, like, this was the request and this was the response. It took 500 milliseconds to do that. You ran something with a parameter of delete, blah, 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 and you got a 200 back. So everything was fine. And you can just collect that on the wire as well. So here you just have an overview. For example, these were all the HTTP requests. These were the ones we have running recently. You could see these were the MySQL requests. For example, we could make that a bit larger because it's hard to see. You can see this is the number of queries we have been running over time. You could see this is the number of requests in total over time, like the height of the bar is how many requests, and the color how long they took. You could see like response percentiles, like most of our requests were very fast. That's nice. We had a couple of errors, like let's make them red because they're easier to see that way. You could see some requests here failed and produced an error, but most of our requests were green and okay. And you could see, for example, here the HTTP requests, those were actual errors. You have a latency histogram, like most requests were fast, but somebody had to wait 600 milliseconds. Not that bad, but still okay. And we do understand the various protocols. So for example, for web transactions, we would know how many web transactions were running here over time. You could see which URLs were mostly hit, like in the last 12 hours, we had 4,000 requests to our website. You could see which error codes happened and what somebody was trying to ping. That's an interesting one. I have no idea why somebody would try to access that. But anyway, somebody did try and was obviously not that successful. Or you could, for example, see the MySQL errors. So for example, here you can see when did we have MySQL errors, with which methods did we run, and like, okay, we ran select, or you could, for example, see then somewhere here, which is very hard to see, there should be some inserts. And you can see which queries were ran the most often. Or for example, you could look into the MySQL errors. FileBeat, MySQL overview. And you could see what you got in the error log of MySQL. And you can see, okay, got an error reading communication packet. So something is wrong with our setup here, and we might want to look into why actually we have this communication error. And it's probably also related because we're running multiple of these statements, and then one of them is not returning properly. So this is all nice, and you can collect that kind of information. You could, by the way, see the same thing for Nginx. All the access logs and also the error logs that we have collected. For example, here you could see these were errors that. Has anybody been running weird queries? Did anybody run it without the variable? Because that might be the only reason. But at least we have collected these errors here to see that something was wrong. because I assume what you did was you clicked on view record and then removed the ID entirely, because that would throw you to an error page and should log one of these then. But if you refresh that, we should get another one of those, hopefully, and then you would see that, hey, something is wrong in your application, and let's figure out what is going on there. And you also have the access logs, which are further down here. You could see these were the requests, and these were the actual response people got. And you can see this is what people tried. So here again, from the access logs, we could just see all soap caller. We could see everything that you have tried. I don't have an echo PHP in here, but thanks for trying. But this looks like a bot actually. So I don't have PHP in my admin or anything. But at least you can see that your site is being pretty busy with stuff. I think we're pretty much at the end. So I will push the code to this URL. If you want to play around with it, it will just create an AWS instance and deploy everything with Ansible automatically, so you can just try it out. So what we have seen is, first, use stored procedures or something proper to avoid SQL injections and don't write code like me. Do proper logging so that you are at least seeing what is happening. You could spin this multiple ways. You could see it in the access log. You could log from your application to see the actual queries that have been running. You might collect like, hey, is my website giving back any errors? For example, with PacketBeat, which is a lot like Wireshark, to collect those. And finally, to actually protect your site, you can run ModSecurity to either just log bad stuff is happening and standing by and just watching, or to actually block it, but blocking it has the downside it might block valid requests as well. So you will need to look into those logs pretty frequently to figure out, like, am I not blocking the wrong stuff here? And that's pretty much it. Any questions before lunch? Yes, please.
One question. So you showed the packet beat as well. So is this something that runs in the same Apache then as the web application firewall does?
Yes. So, well, it needs to run wherever you want to capture the packets. It could be on a proxy in front of it, but it could also be right at the application or wherever it makes sense for you. You could even, if you're afraid of the performance overhead, you could even fork over the network traffic to another instance, like on a network level, and then analyze it in parallel. PacketBeat can be quite heavy if you have lots of packets, because like libpcap, it doesn't add latency because it copies the packet and analyzes it in parallel, but it does add overhead for the analysis and then shipping that data off, depending on your rules as well. By the way, one thing that is maybe not super clear here is, what happens if we use HTTPS? Will we be able to see anything? No, we cannot look into the traffic. So what you could do, for example, is you could terminate TLS on a proxy in front and then look at the traffic after the proxy when it's unencrypted. What I'm doing here is I'm just looking at the unencrypted traffic. For TLS traffic, we could just see, like, are the certificates valid? We could also see, like, TCP IP information, who is talking to who, but we cannot look into the encrypted traffic itself, which probably makes sense as well. So yeah, since I'm running Apache without TLS in my example and Nginx with TLS, we would only be able to see the packets to Apache, but not Nginx, because, well, encrypted. But that will apply to any encrypted protocol here. Other questions? Or was that the complete answer?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Everybody ready for lunch? Yes? Cool. If you have more questions, just find me afterwards. Grab stickers in the seat over there. Thanks a lot.